Right. The next item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 7713 in the name of Malcolm-Chisholm on the Folic-Acid-Awareness-Campaign. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. I would also invite those members of the public leaving the gallery to do so as quickly and quietly as possible too. Now call on Malcolm-Chisholm. 7 minutes, please, Mr. Chisholm.
Presiding Officer, I am very pleased to put forward this motion today, and as I think this is the first time the Parliament has discussed issues related to spina bifida, I should begin by saying something about the condition. Spina bifida is Latin for split spine and refers to a fault in the development of a baby's spinal cord. The neural tube, which goes on to become the spine and brain, fails to close properly, and that fault may occur as early as 28 days after conception. Spina bifida, along with its associated condition hydrocephalus, is the most common and severe birth defect in Europe. Moreover, Scotland historically has a higher prevalence of these neural tube defects than anywhere else in Europe. As a result, these conditions profoundly affect the lives of over 3,500 children, young people and adults in Scotland. A woman usually won't know she is carrying a baby affected by spina bifida until she has her 20-week scan. She may then have only 48 hours to decide whether to keep or abort her child, which will by then be fully formed. That is, of course, an extremely traumatic situation for the mother. Most of those with spina bifida are born paralysed from the waist down and will also suffer severe bladder and bowel problems. 80% will also have hydrocephalus, which causes a range of neurological conditions. There is no known cure, and both conditions cause lifelong complex disabilities. But a significant number of affected pregnancies could be prevented, and that's the key point I want to come back to today. The Scottish Spina Bifida Association is the only charity in Scotland dedicated to providing advice, advocacy and support for people born with spina bifida and/or hydrocephalus and their families. I am delighted that some of its supporters are here in the gallery today. I also had the privilege of hosting a reception in the Parliament yesterday evening, attended by a number of MSPs, at which the Minister for Public Health, Michael Matheson, also spoke, along with a wonderful 10-year-old girl from Glasgow called Ella, and Dr. Margot Whiteford, a clinical geneticist also from Glasgow who has spina bifida and is also, I'm pleased to say, in the gallery today. She is the association's chairperson and earlier this year became president of the International Federation for Spina Bifida and Hydrocephalus. To reflect that wider focus, the association decided that Scotland should, for the first time, mark World Spina Bifida and Hydrocephalus Day, which was on the 25th of October. The day serves to remind the public and policymakers of the need to increase awareness of these conditions to help improve the lives of people living with them. The association's contribution is its major public health campaign, Are You Getting Enough? The campaign has been triggered by the shocking statistic that only 48% of women in Scotland are aware they could help reduce the risk of their pregnancy being affected by spina bifida by taking a folic acid supplement prior to conception. Most women don't start taking folic acid until they have been tested positive for pregnancy, by which time it's often too late to prevent spina bifida. But there is strong evidence that taking folic acid, vitamin B9, at least 3 months before conception can help reduce the risk of spina bifida and other neural tube defects by 72%. The Association's campaign is therefore about getting that message across to women who are planning a pregnancy or who might become pregnant. It's also about making folic acid awareness part of family planning education throughout Scotland. The campaign builds on advice already issued by NHS Health Scotland that every woman who might become pregnant should take a daily tablet containing 0.4 milligrams of folic acid before they conceive and during the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. It's easy to buy folic acid tablets. Many multivitamin formulas also contain 0.4 milligram of folic acid. Women who are eligible for the Healthy Start scheme can also get free vitamins containing folic acid, vitamin C and vitamin D. Some women are at increased risk of having a baby with a neural tube defect. They include those with diabetes, those who are taking anti-epilepsy medication, those who have celiac disease, or those who have a partner with a neural tube defect or a family history of such defects. They should ask their GP to prescribe a higher daily dose of 5 milligrams. Moreover, women who are very overweight are at greater risk of having babies with spina bifida, and the advice is that they should seriously consider trying to lose weight before planning a pregnancy. You can also get folic acid through diet, where it's known as folate. Good sources of folate are berries, oranges, potatoes, peas, lentils, granary and wholemeal breads, and fortified breakfast cereals. Moreover, supplementation is still required for maximum benefit. In relation to fortification, the Food Standards Agency has for some years now recommended the mandatory fortification of bread or flour with folic acid to reduce the risk of neural tube defects. That recommendation has now been reinforced by the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition. The Scottish Spina Bifida Association strongly supports fortification, as that would help to avert the risks associated with unplanned pregnancies. I believe ministers are currently considering the fortification issue, and I hope that Michael Matheson might have something to say about that in his reply to the debate. To conclude, I am grateful for the opportunity to use this debate to raise awareness of these little-known conditions. As my motion indicates, I also wish the Scottish Spina Bifida Association every success with its campaign to encourage greater numbers of women in my constituency and throughout Scotland to understand the importance of taking folic acid prior to pregnancy in order to help prevent spina bifida and other neural tube defects.
Many thanks. I now call on Margaret McCulloch to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I apologise that I have to leave early for another meeting at 1 o'clock. I would like to start my contribution by congratulating Malcolm-Chisholm for securing this debate, as well as the efforts of all those who have been involved in the Folic-Acid-Awareness-Campaign. In particular, I would like to pay tribute to Scottish Spina Bifida Association. I hope that the launch of their campaign last Thursday on the World Spina Bifida Day was a success and that will lead to a change. The question for this Parliament is, what should that change look like, and how can we help make it happen? We know that the better women who are expecting a baby manage their health, the better the outcomes for everyone. We can prevent illness and long-term conditions, we can ensure a better pregnancy for mother and child, and we can give every baby a better start in life. As the Scottish Spina Bifida Association makes clear, we can reduce the number of pregnancies affected by spina bifida and other neural tube defects. Let's be clear, support for children with spina bifida is better than ever before. Our understanding of spina bifida and the neural tube defects has improved, medical technology has advanced, and paediatric neuroscience has evolved. But there is a strong case for prevention. Taking folic acids in the right quantities is a key to that. There is no shortage of information about the importance of folic acids in foods, which are sources of vitamin B, but that information has to get to women who are expecting children and also to couples who are thinking about starting a family. There are examples in the health service of best practice of how that information is presented in an accessible and instructive way. We need to learn from that best practice, but where we can make real difference is in raising public awareness more generally and hopefully getting the message to people at that pre-pregnancy stage. This isn't about lecturing the public, it's simply about explaining how a readily available substance in the right amounts benefits them and their children. My appeal today is that the Government and the Chief Medical Officer work constructively with campaigners. We have seen progress on fortified foods, and now we have to see progress on public awareness. The will is there, the science is sound, and the benefits cannot be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Stuart Stevenson to be followed by Nanette Milne.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and hearty congratulations to Malcolm-Chisholm for giving us this opportunity to discuss this important topic. He suggested, and I can't rebut this, that it's the first time the Scottish Parliament has debated the subject of spina bifida. The motion, of course, and his speech did focus on the need to ensure women are better informed. I'd like to suggest that perhaps there is some marginal benefit in men also being better informed, despite their comparatively modest role in bringing children into the world, because partnerships are the best environment in which children will come into the world. So I hope that the presence of men, both in the public gallery and in the debate, shows that we too are interested. Now, in bringing this debate to Parliament, Malcolm-Chisholm has forced me for the first time to consider the matter in any material way, to look at the Scottish Spina Bifida Association website. I found it engaging, interesting and informative, focusing through the Are You Getting Enough campaign on ensuring that women's awareness is raised. And I think that's absolutely excellent. It also talked about diet, and the role that that can play in increasing the amount of folic acid we all take, but in particular that women take. And I must say, looking at the list of foods that help us on this, I found nothing on the list other than things which I'm rather keen to eat. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, liver, not everyone's favourite, but I love it, spinach, asparagus, peas, chickpeas, brown rice and fortified breakfast cereals. And indeed, I went away and got a wee recipe from Nigella Lawson's website for chickpea curry. And I thought, I'm actually now feeling hungry just thinking about that recipe. And furthermore, to make a chickpea curry for a single person, a quick calculation has shown me it's about £1.20 a serving. So not only is it good for you, but it's economically effective as well, which in these straitened times is probably quite important. But even more importantly, there was the reference to fortified breakfast cereals. And one of the ones that brings a wide range of benefits is, of course, porridge. Now, if porridge is made from oats that are not over-processed, then there's a decent amount of folic acid in them. And of course, for the pregnant, having porridge as the start of your day is an excellent thing to have, because apparently it reduces the risk of constipation, one of the side effects of pregnancy. It will always top up the folic acids. And it is something which also is a natural weight loss agent, because it fills you up and makes you less hungry. So I commend porridge as one of the ways forward. But I say all this in the context of that food is something that helps. It is not in and of itself the complete answer, because we also need to get the supplements that are going to make sure that we have appropriate folic acid input. I saw quite a complex range of figures for people with different pre-existing conditions, and indeed some indication that over-consumption of folic acid could cause problems in relation to vitamin B12 deficiency being suppressed. So I think getting advice from professionals is important, and the motion that's before us does focus on a way in which that advice can be given through contraceptive and birth control advice, and I think in that sense we've got before us something which is an excellent basis for dealing with this problem. Presiding Officer.
Many thanks. Many thanks. Now call on Annette Milne to be followed by Jimmy Hepburn.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and my thanks too to Malcolm-Chisholm for sponsoring this debate and for highlighting the welcome addition of the National Folic-Awareness-Campaign Are You Getting Enough as one of the measures which can contribute towards the prevention of spina bifida. I'd also like to thank him for hosting last evening's excellent reception, which gave us so much interesting information about the Scottish Spina Bifida Association and its campaign to educate women on the importance of taking folic acid before and during the early months of pregnancy in reducing the incidence of neural tube defects like spina bifida and hydrocephalus. I learned too that milling of flour removes folic acid, and that to replace it by fortifying flour and bread might be a very sensible idea. I was also delighted to meet my North East constituents, Wendy Hulse and her son Jay from Aberdeen, who are enthusiastic supporters of the SSBA campaign. And, Presiding Officer, I have apologies for them from their constituency member Mark MacDonald MSP, who is unable to attend this debate because of other parliamentary commitments. Spina bifida is one of the most common birth defects, with a worldwide instance of about 1 in every 1,000 births. And in Scotland alone, there are over 3,500 people, from children to adults, who live with the condition on a daily basis. And in the UK, it's a startling statistic that every day 2 babies are conceived with a neural tube defect such as spina bifida, which demonstrates just how prevalent these conditions are. Although there's neither a single cause nor any known way to prevent it entirely, there is, as we've heard, evidence to suggest that dietary supplements which contain folic acid can help to reduce the incidence of spina bifida. The message that needs to get across is that women in Scotland who are sexually active and who are at an age where pregnancy is possible need to be aware that they can go some way to reducing the possibility of having a child with a neural tube defect if they take folic acid. Common sense simply dictates that every woman would want her child to be safe and healthy. And anything which can contribute to making this a reality should be part of any form of family planning. If using folic acid for 3 months prior to conception can reduce the occurrence of NTDs by a staggering 72%, then this needs to be communicated in an effective and forceful manner. As Malcolm-Chisholm has indicated in his motion, 52% of women in Scotland are unaware that folic acid can potentially be a part of preventative measures, and this lack of knowledge has to be addressed. That's why I welcome the Scottish Spina Bifida Association's latest campaign, Are You Getting Enough?, accompanied by a glossy leaflet showing a bare-chested Scotsman in a kilt, which you could say certainly helps to grab your attention. Having said that, if such a leaflet being placed in surgeries, health centres and maternity clinics does succeed in women picking it up and reading it, then the first step in the campaign has been achieved. The leaflet contains easy-to-read material where the facts are put across in a lively yet informative manner, giving clear guidance on the effectiveness of folic acid. Further information is given on the recommended dosage of folic acid tablets, which should be higher for women with diabetes who are celiac or are taking anti-epilepsy medication, as we've heard from Malcolm-Chisholm. So I therefore congratulate the SSBA for what I hope will prove to be a very effective campaign. We could also learn something from the United States, where folate fortification of grain-based products, such as certain breakfast cereals, has been mandatory since 1998. And I'd welcome the Minister's views on this sort of action when he sums up the debate. Presiding Officer, the motion also mentions the great work undertaken by the families and carers of individuals who have spina bifida. And in that context, I pay tribute to the family group in my home city of Aberdeen, which meets monthly and which has been offering support since the 1960s, and to institutions such as the Pursley Castle Nursing Home in Bucksburn, which specialises in the care of those with spina bifida. Finally, I'm sure that colleagues will join with me in congratulating the organisers of World Spina Bifida Day, now in its 2nd year, and in wishing them well for the future as they work to raise awareness of the condition and how its incidence can be reduced. I congratulate Malcolm-Chisholm for bringing it to our attention. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now call on Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Anne McTaggart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and in welcoming the debate, can I also join with us in congratulating Malcolm-Chisholm on securing it? And can I say this is a very important subject, so I'm rather surprised to learn that this is the first time we've debated the issue of spina bifida in this chamber, and I certainly don't think it should be the last. I was also surprised, Presiding Officer, that Nigella Lawson merited a mention in today's debate, but rather less surprised that it was Stuart Stevenson who managed to mention her. Can I apologise to Malcolm-Chisholm and the Scottish Spina Bifida Association for being unable to attend the reception last night. The Scottish Spina Bifida Association is an organisation that I know very well, Presiding Officer, because they are based in my constituency in Cumbernauld. I've been very happy to visit them many times, and indeed have visited them previously with the Minister for Public Health under the direction of their Chief Executive, Andy Wine. They are playing an outstanding role in supporting families where someone has spina bifida, and if members have been unable to visit their headquarters, it is well worth a visit. It is an excellent facility, which at a time where families who they learn that they have a child that has spina bifida must be a very frightening time for them. It is a very welcoming place Indeed, they're also doing great work in raising awareness of the condition, and of course with their Folic-Acid-Awareness campaign, which we debate today. President Officer, the latest figures available in Scotland confirm that around 1 in every 1,000 pregnancies are affected by spina bifida. Now, that might be considered by some to be a fairly low number, but in the last year there were just under 60,000 births in Scotland, so that would suggest that around 60 children would have been born last year with spina bifida. And we also have to reflect on the point made by Malcolm-Chisholm that the rate in Scotland is higher than elsewhere. So even if people considered that the rate was low, we also have to remember that the severity of the condition, whilst it obviously varies, it can be very severe indeed, and impacts hugely on the life of the person with the condition and their family. And indeed, very sadly, some who suffer the condition may die in infancy. So we do have to remember that behind the figures are individual people, individual families struggling with a very serious condition indeed. So that's why the Folic Acid campaign is so important. We don't know why spina bifida, the condition, is caused, and of course research continues, but we do know that folic acid supplements can reduce the risk of spina bifida in unborn babies. As Malcolm-Chisholm set out, where families have no history of spina bifida, it is recommended women take a dose of 400 mcg daily, and indeed where there is a history of spina bifida, a dose of 5 milligrams is required, and that will help reduce the occurrence of neural tube defects by some 72%. But we know that despite the guidance out there, only around half of those women who become pregnant actually take folic acid before conception. And I think it's important to emphasise those are women who are planning to become pregnant. They aren't women who necessarily experience an unplanned pregnancy. So if that is the rate where women are planning to become pregnant, I think it does suggest there is some way to go to raise awareness of this issue. So can I welcome the efforts of the Scottish Spina Bifida Association. I think it would also be helpful to know how the Scottish Government can support that campaign, what their efforts are to improve the uptake of folic acid, and look forward to hearing what the Minister for Public Health has to say in that regard. I can also congratulate Malcolm-Chisholm once more on securing this very important debate.
Many thanks. Now call on Anne McTaggart to be followed by Stuart Maxwell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and may I firstly congratulate Malcolm-Chisholm, like many others have, for bringing this debate to the Chamber today. The debate is rightly about furthering the awareness of an issue that many people across Scotland are less aware of than possibly should be. People may have heard of spina bifida, but many will not really understand its causes and how it may be prevented. The first statement in the Scottish Government's Improving Maternal and Infant Nutrition, a Framework for Action, states that the Scottish Government wants to ensure that all children have the best possible start to life. I believe that this is something that all members present today can agree upon. The report further recognises that the diet and nutritional status of the mother before conception, as well as during pregnancy, is a key factor in determining the health of the fetus. Like many other issues regarding health, the socio-economic status of an individual can also determine where they sit within a group, in this case, pregnant mothers. The Growing Up in Scotland study found that of those surveyed, 81% of those women with a lower level standard grade had taken folic acid, compared to 96% of those who were educated to degree level. This is further compounded with 81% of those in the lowest income group, compared to 97% in the highest income group. These figures show that some children who are born into this world, they may already be at a disadvantage. In the same study, it was found that only 48% of women took folic acid prior to their pregnancy compared to the 90% that took folic acid during their pregnancy. However, we should note the fact that not all pregnancies are planned, and as such, this could have an effect upon these figures. The campaign launched by the Spina Bifida Association, Are You Getting Enough?, is one that highlights an issue that has been prevalent in Scotland for some time now. According to Eurocat in 2010, Scotland has had a higher prevalence of neural tube defects compared to other European nations. Yet, even though the NHS have produced guidelines to inform women about neural tube defects, over 50% of sexually active women are not taking folic acid on a regular basis. It is thought that compliance with the NHS guidelines could see these cases reduced by up to 72%. If we are to tackle this problem, we need to ensure that we are giving expectant mothers fair and equal treatment to ensure that their child is born with the best possible chance in life. To conclude, Presiding Officer, although the taking of folic acid before and during pregnancy does not totally remove the risk of a child contracting spina bifida, it reduces the risk significantly. As Dr Margot Whiteford, consultant and chair of the Spina Bifida Association, states, it reduces the risk probably between 2/3 and 3/4. I would like to reiterate how vitally important the Spina Bifida Association's Are You Getting Enough? National Folic Acid Awareness Campaign is in drawing attention to the necessity for every woman who is planning to become pregnant or who is sexually active and might become pregnant to take folic acid as directed by their GP. And I am also pleased, Presiding Officer, to note that Michael Matheson, the Scottish Government's Public Health Minister, has backed this campaign, which endorses the NHS guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Now Colin Stewart-Maxwell, after which we'll move to the closing speech from the Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I join with others in congratulating Malcolm-Chisholm for securing this most important debate, and also welcome the Scottish Spina Bifida Association campaign. Now, I am delighted to have this opportunity to take part in this debate on the importance of folic acid, a subject about which I have been concerned for a number of years. Folic acid, or vitamin B9, was identified in the late 1930s, part of the great increase in understanding of the vital nutrients naturally present in food, which happened in the years between the wars. It was isolated in spinach leaves in the early 1940s, but it wasn't until 1960 that deficiency of folic acid was linked to neural tube defects in babies. We all recognise that spina bifida and hydrocephalus are devastating conditions, causing paralysis, bowel problems and often neurological problems. But nevertheless, the good news is that 72%, nearly 3/4 of these cases could be prevented by the simple act of adding folic acid to flour. The problem is that neural tube defects happen so early in a pregnancy, often as early as the 28th day after conception, that unless folic acid supplementation is started before conception, it is all too easy to miss that very small window in which a baby can be protected. That's why some countries as diverse as Canada, the United States, South Africa, Chile and Australia, have opted for mandatory supplementation of flour with folic acid. Now, this ensures that all women in these countries of childbearing age are getting the folic acid they need in their diets. Now, of course, there are, as there always are with supplementation, some other risks that have to be weighed in the balance. Now, one such risk group are elderly people who have pernicious anemia and who could have their symptoms masked by this supplementation. So any move to supplement flour with folic acid would need to be accompanied by measures for health professionals to tackle pernicious anemia, which is a vitamin B12 deficiency. But this is entirely manageable, and with proper guidance to GPs could be dealt with relatively straightforwardly. Now, I think it's important to point out that fortification of food is the norm and has been so for many, many years. Many foods in Scotland are already fortified. For example, by law in the UK, iron, thiamine and niacin must be added to flour as they are removed with bran during the milling of wheat. Margarine is also fortified by law with vitamins A and D. Food supplementation has been with us for decades and dates back to the days of rationing, when the UK government, armed with the knowledge that had been gained by scientists in the 20s and 30s, understood the consequences of rationing. They knew, because of the work of, amongst others, our own John Boyd Orr in Glasgow, one of the foremost nutritional scientists of the 20th century, a man known as the father of modern nutrition. He knew that many people in Scotland had too little money to feed themselves and their families properly. It is well known amongst health professionals that advice and knowledge is eagerly seized upon and utilised by the most educated and well-off sections of the population, and Anne McTaggart made mention of this in her contribution. This is not a bad thing, because if even one child is protected from a neural tube defect, then we should be delighted. But the danger, and it is a danger that we as legislators have to consider, is that we leave the poorest and most vulnerable women and children in our society behind and unprotected. If we fail to fortify flour with folic acid, then we run the very real risk that people who do not have the money for folic acid supplements, and don't forget the advice is to take folic acid supplements for at least 3 months before you get pregnant, which is often an open-ended commitment, will not get the protection that better-off parts of the population will receive. Many of these women are too pushed to think about supplementation. These women and their children need protection too. And we mustn't ignore the fact that many pregnancies are not planned, and therefore women will not have been taking folic acid as recommended, and therefore supplementation would protect them as well. Now, the Food Standards Agency in Scotland recommends that there is a mandatory fortification for bread or flour with folic acid, and has done so since 2009. Now, I'm pleased to say that this is indeed SNP policy. I want to remind the Minister of that. In a motion which I put before National Conference in October 2006, Conference agreed that, and I quote from that motion, the SNP supports the addition of folic acid to flour and or other grain products sold in Scotland to dramatically reduce the number of children born in Scotland who suffer from neural tube defects. And this is the great point. Neural tube defects would drop like a stone if folic acid was added to flour and products made from flour.
You might wish to draw to a close, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Now, I know that the Scottish Government is currently considering, along with the other administrations, the addition of folic acid to flour, and I'd be delighted to hear the Minister for Public Health if he could indicate when he expects a decision to be taken. I feel very strongly that the addition of folic acid to flour and flour-based products in Scotland would be an extremely important step in protecting the health of every baby in Scotland, and I am sure all of us agree that it's something that we could support.
Many thanks. I now call on the Minister, Michael Matheson, to close the debate on behalf of the Government. Mr. Minister, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I, like others, offer my congratulations to Malcolm-Chisholm in securing time for this debate, and to thank all the members for their contributions, to which I've listened to very closely. I'm sure that all members would recognise that having a child or a family member with a disability can be hugely challenging for parents and carers and the family as a whole. And the work that the Scottish Spina Bifida Association provide and carry out is absolutely essential in supporting those families with children who have spina bifida. And from the presentation last night from Ella, that 10-year-old child who was along last night's parents, demonstrated very clearly some of the challenges which they face, and also some of the way in which they have been assisted by the Scottish Spina Bifida Association. But no one could be left in any doubt that when it came to having a discussion on spina bifida or any other issue, Ella would have the last word. And she was a clearly very inspiring young 10-year-old. But I'm sure members would also note with concern that some 52% of women in Scotland are not aware of how they could prevent spina bifida and other neural tube defects. And the campaign which has been launched by the Scottish Spina Bifida Association, Are You Getting Enough?, is an important contribution as part of the the Association's work as part of the National Folic-Acid-Awareness-Campaign, which is to encourage a greater number of women across Scotland to learn about the importance of taking folic acid during and prior to and during the early stages of their pregnancy. It is known that not having enough folic acid during pregnancy is the most significant risk factor for spina bifida. As a government, we are clearly committed to improving health and well-being of the Scottish population as a whole and ensuring that children get the best possible start in life. That's why we published Improving Maternity and Infant Nutrition, a framework for action back in January 2011. This framework for action is to be taken forward by boards, local authorities and others with the aim of improving the nutrition of pregnant women, babies and young children. It's the first framework of its type which looks at nutrition of mothers before and during pregnancy. During pregnancy, we know that there is an increased demand for several nutrients such as vitamin D and folate. The increasing demand for vitamin D and folate cannot be met from food sources alone, and therefore that's why it's recommended that all pregnant women take a daily supplement of each, in addition to increasing their dietary intake. Now, as Malcolm-Chisholm made reference to in his contribution, the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition recommended that before conception and until the 12th week of pregnancy, women take folic acid supplements of some 400 milligrams per day to reduce the risk of having an infant with neural tube defect. In addition, women are also advised to eat food rich in folate and folic acid and to increase their nutrient intake of some 300 milligrams per day for the duration of their pregnancy. And I think some of the recipe ideas that were offered up by Stuart Stevenson are a very good example of how some women can go about doing so. NHS Health Scotland have also launched an updated leaflet with information on folic acid before and during pregnancy. This particular leaflet is free and widely available and provides basic information on folate from food, folic acid supplements and fortified food products, and recommends on intake for women before pregnancy and up to the 12th week of their pregnancy. Its recommendations are in line with the Scientific Advisory Committee recommendations, and there is also advice available for professionals on what advice they should provide around folic acid, and to ensure that all health professionals see themselves as having a role in promoting folic acid supplements. Through implementation plans provided by our NHS boards, we are also aware of the specific work that they are presently undertaking to raise awareness of folic acid supplementation before and during pregnancy, mainly targeted at particular groups such as those who had pregnancy loss or at high risk and attend preconception clinics. Now, at present in Scotland, women and babies who are at the greatest risk of poor health outcomes are the least likely to access and or benefit from the antenatal health care that they need. This can significantly hamper the contribution that maternity care services can make in improving health and also in reducing health inequalities. So we know that improving access to antenatal care is insufficient. It needs to be accompanied by a focus on continuous effective assessment of health and social needs in order to identify any prevention and early intervention actions needed for babies that are born and in early days of their life. We need to know what to do more effectively, and maternity care staff need to work in partnership with each other and women and families to make sure that they address these issues effectively. And that's why we have introduced for NHS boards an antenatal access heat target, which means that at least 80% of pregnant women in each of the lower quintiles will be booked for their antenatal care at the 12th week of gestation by March 2015, so that we can ensure improvements in this area. Following the recommendation, Presiding Officer, that a number of members have made reference to around the fortification of flour and other products made from flour, the Chief Medical Officer and the Food Standards Agency and I, the Scottish Government as a whole, are very clear that the fortification of bread and flour with folic acid is an important way in which we can increase the folic acid intake of women who may become pregnant. I am also clear that it would be an effective way of reaching sections of the population with the lowest folate intake. We are working with our colleagues in other parts of the UK to look at trying to develop a UK-wide approach to mandatory fortification, and we are actively considering the mandatory fortification of flour with folic acid with their partners in other parts of the UK. I've requested further advice from the Food Standards Agency in Scotland on this matter, and I expect them to provide that updated information early in the new year. Presiding Officer, as a government, we very much welcome the Scottish Spina Bifida Association's national folic acid awareness campaign, which is very much in line with the advice that we also provide as a government. I wish them well with the campaign, and they can be assured that as a government we will continue to look at what measures can be taken forward in order to reduce the incidence of neurotube defects in Scotland, including the possibility of taking forward mandatory fortification of folic acid in flour and bread.
Many thanks. And I now suspend this meeting until 2:30. Thank you all.